Welcome. My name is Greg Mannix. I'm VP of International Business Development and General Manager for Europe at Life Science Nation. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Karen Dio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Dio. I'm the Director of Investor Research at LSN.
So today, the topic of the webinar is maximizing the power of your pitch. And although we'll speak about the Innovators Pitch Challenge at the RESI conference that's hosted by Life Science Nation, what we're talking about today is valid for any pitching competition, any investor pitch that you'll need to do in or outside of a conference or an event. So I think it's really relevant information and a really important part of fundraising. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes, indeed.
So today we'll briefly introduce Life Science Nation for those of you who aren't familiar with us, and the Innovators Pitch Challenge, which is the specific challenge that is held at the RESI conference. We'll talk about what makes a good presentation, and these tips are, as I mentioned, they're valid for any pitch that you may need to do. And I think it's also important to talk about how to prepare for investor questions, because that's an important part of the Innovators Pitch Challenge is the Q&A part after each pitch. Next slide. So Life Science Nation is a company that specializes in helping early stage life science companies from across the spectrum of life science technologies, meaning drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital health, R&D tools. We are a company that helps early stage companies connect with investors and strategic partners that are a fit for them. And the way we do that is through data. So we curate an investor database that tracks about 10,000 investors belonging to 3,000 or so investment firms across the world, across the globe, specialized in the life sciences. We also curate a database called the Business Development Database. It's a database of companies tracking 60,000 life science companies from across the board as well. And this is not all early stage. This is early stage, later stage, big pharma, service providers. It includes a very wide range of companies. We do some consulting through our Focus on Cures Accelerator. We're happy to give you more information about that. And then our most visible activity at Life Science Nation is the RESI conference, Redefining Early Stage Investment. It's really the most focused conference in the world on early stage funding. It's held 5 times a year. And the first in-person conference after the pandemic is coming up this September 21st through 23rd in Boston. We do a conference every year in Boston, but obviously, for the last 2 years, we weren't able to. Our conferences became digital conferences. But we are planning on being back in person at the Boston conference this September, and then again in San Francisco for JP Morgan in early January of next year. Usually the second week of January. I believe the dates are January 10th and 11th for the RESI conference. So the RESI conference, as we mentioned, is a meeting place for early stage companies and investors and strategic partners. And we also have what's called the Innovators Pitch Challenge going on at RESI that we'll talk about today. Can we go to the next slide, Karen? So at the RESI conference, one thing that jumps out immediately when you look at this conference is the number and quality of the investors who come to partner with early stage companies and to meet. So this is just a sample of the types of investors that you'll see at any given RESI conference that goes from big pharma companies that are household names all the way down to less known family offices, small VCs, angel groups, foundations. We have really 10 categories of investors who come to our conferences and who are also curated in our database, the LSN Investor Database. Next slide. And just at a glance, the RESI conference is unique because we have such a large turnout of early stage investors. That's really a one-to-one ratio between investors and startup companies. So your odds of getting a good number of meetings at the RESI conference are much better than at other conferences where there might be 10 companies competing to meet with one investor. Here we have a one-to-one ratio. There are also some great service providers attending, like CROs and professional services, and just a really positive environment for networking and having one-on-one meetings through our partnering platform, which is quite a unique partnering platform that allows you to really identify the people you need to be meeting with. So that's what RESI conference looks like at a glance. You want to go to the next slide? And I'll let Karen take over here to tell you about what's happening at our next conference.
Yes, absolutely. So what do we do at our RESI conferences? So the main focus of our conferences is, of course, the partnering, the one-on-one partnering between companies and investors. But we look at our conferences as a way to not just let startups partner, but a way to increase your knowledge to help improve your fundraising success. So to do that, we have two full tracks of panels. One track on each day is full of investor panels where these investors will come and give information based on the topic of the panel, tips to the startups, what they're looking for, how to reach out to them, what not to do when you're reaching out to them. And you can see by this agenda that we try to cover both sectors and investor types. So in terms of sectors, we'll have, medical devices, digital health. We'll also do oncology innovation if we're doing something a little bit more specific. We also have AI and longevity focused panels like New, Now, and Next for longevity, or AI healthcare investments. And we'll also do a couple panels of what we call Tales from the Road. And this is where CEOs that have had successful fundraisers come and share their stories, give information from their perspective as what worked, what they learned. In addition to this, we will also have tracks of workshops that are provided by service providers and, really industry experts who see a lot of what's going on and come to share their information as well. So there really is a lot to learn when you attend these conferences, even beyond the partnering. Now, in terms of the Innovators Pitch Challenge, so pitch challenges are a dime a dozen. You'll see them all over the place. And it never hurts to be prepared. The specific of our Innovators Pitch Challenge is that we look for all startups, so drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital health, R&D tools and services. We cover all areas of the life sciences, but RESI's main focus is those raising seed to Series B. So anywhere from a few tens of thousands to all the way up to 50 million. We can be a good fit for you. And this is really an opportunity to, you can get really great connections. It increases your exposure, but it's also a really good way to practice your pitch. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons to participate is it really increases your visibility. We announce all of our attendees, all of the participants in our next phase newsletter. You get the winners will then be announced as well a second time once the conference is over. Your logo will be featured on the RESI website and the live agenda and in the program guide. You'll be able to we'll connect you with your session judges after the pitch session. And the top 3 companies will win the prizes. So those are the finalists that we'll announce. And so they're announced during the closing networking reception on the 2nd day of the conference. Now, we are kind of trying to bring this into many different avenues for the companies to increase their exposure. So in addition to the actual pitch, each company will also get a poster to present in the exhibition hall. Now, this is where you'll get your RESI cash, which is, just monopoly money essentially that we hand out to all attendees. And then this is a way for them to vote for their favorite company. Is they'll come by the exhibit hall, they'll see the poster. The goal is for each company to engage the people that are walking around, show them your company, pitch to them, and get them to invest their money in you. And the company with the most investment is the one that wins. And so this is a great way to get a lot of ad hoc meetings. And we've seen a lot of companies form a lot of really good connections by being at their poster, engaging people that walk by in the exhibition hall, and really making sure to connect and engage with people. And that's the way you get your name out there. So this is just a tool that we provide to allow companies to really engage as much as possible. Now, for the pitch itself, we try to group companies based on, similar either sector or technology, so that there's some cohesion to the sessions and that we can ensure that the investor panel is a fit for all of the companies. Each company will have 4 minutes to pitch with slides, and the room is open to all RESI attendees. And then that'll be followed by 9 to 10 minutes of live Q&A with a panel of 5 to 7 investor judges. And as I mentioned, afterwards, we will be connecting the investors with the companies. So you will have a chance to follow up with them, get additional feedback or anything like that. Now, in addition to that, we've been working very hard to sort of come up with a hybrid format that will meld the benefits of the virtual format with the benefits of the in-person format. So of course, each company will have their poster and their pitch session, which is all live and for conference attendees, but we also want to make sure that there's a good way for the company to get its information out there to all attendees in the virtual format as well. So we will still have a live agenda as well as our program guide for the on-site. And the live agenda will be the digital format where each company that participates in the IPC will get a dedicated page. And this is a great place to, put your marketing collateral, a company description, a pitch deck, your executive summary. It will, of course, include contact information. And if you would like, we would recommend also posting a 4-minute pitch video. So again, if someone isn't able to go to your pitch or they're a virtual only attendee, they will still be able to view a recording of a pitch from you. You can also include detailed images or demos of the product or testimonials, but we really definitely recommend including the pitch video as a way to reach a broader audience, even if they are not able to attend the conference itself. Now, with that, I will let Greg discuss the application and other things that make a good pitch video.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so as Karen mentioned, the IPC is such a great opportunity to get additional visibility for your company in so many ways. I mean, it goes out in our newsletter and all of the branding that is available during the conference for everyone to see. So if you want to apply, the deadline for our upcoming in-person September conference is a week from this Friday, August 12th. And you can find the application very easily on the resiconference.com website. And the application is literally 5 minutes at most to fill out. It's very simple. We ask you to upload a few documents for our evaluation team to to see what your company is doing and make sure it's a fit for the RESI conference. So we ask for your pitch deck and an executive summary to be uploaded, as well as a little bit of information and a description of what you do. So very simple application, and there's still plenty of time to apply, and there is still space available for the September conference, which I highly, highly recommend. Next slide. So what makes for a good presentation? This is really important stuff, because we see all different types of presentations at the RESI conference and in the IPC. And some presentations get more traction than others. And I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind is that this is not a scientific presentation. Don't think of this, any pitch competition as a scientific presentation. If you're attending a scientific conference and presenting to scientists, your presentation would have a different focus. But that's not the case here. When you're pitching at a pitch competition, at an investment conference like RESI or many other conferences that are out there, you are pitching to a wide audience, not just scientists. In fact, probably most people in the audience don't have a science background at an investment conference. So, don't focus on your science only. You want to show that you are investor ready. That is your goal of your presentation. And what you're hoping for is to get traction with potential investors so that you can have a future meeting and start a dialogue. So what does that include? What things should you include in your presentation? Definitely the market that you're addressing and what is the unmet need, your IP situation, any data that you have, but you don't want to spend many slides on presenting your data. This isn't the place for that. So the data that you present should be a summary of the data that you have, and the most representative data for that describes your technology. And because it's a 4-minute pitch, in this case, some conferences have a different format. It might be a little bit longer, 5 minutes, or I've seen as long as 10 minutes, but that's rare. A 4-minute pitch is, I think, plenty of time to get all of the key information included in your presentation. So you can talk about your data. You should talk about your data. You should definitely emphasize your management team, any strategic alliances that you have with, could be manufacturing or clinical partners, but it could be other strategic partners like a consulting firm or a legal firm, a law firm that you're working with, anything that adds value to your story. And and you want to be sure that your marketing material, your pitch deck, your website, etc., is as investor ready as possible and has a professional look and feel. So that's an overview of what you want to include in your presentation. Next slide. So clearly describe your technology. And although that sounds obvious, it's not always that easy. And here is an example of 2 ways to describe your technology. One way that is not clear, like saying something like, my company has a proprietary treatment for many critical illnesses. So that basically doesn't say anything about your company. It just really doesn't help give context. But if instead you say, we are developing an IND-ready small molecule asset for breast cancer by activating natural killer cells. So that's a much more descriptive phrase about your company and is much more compelling in your presentation. So when you're thinking, how are you going to describe your technology? Think about that. Don't use vague sentences or phrases that don't really clarify what it is you're doing. Try to think of ways that you can, in a few words, because you don't have a lot of time in a 4-minute presentation, think a lot about how you're going to describe your technology in a single sentence that makes it clear what you do and what makes you special. Be realistic with your statements. So that means knowing who your competitors are. Also, an important thing to keep in mind is that it's never a good thing to say, and we don't have any competition. That's an immediate red flag for investors, because there's always some standard of care for any given ailment that is being used, and that would be a competitor to what you're developing. So you should know who your competitors are or what the standard of care is for that particular disease, and highlight what makes your technology different from those competitors. And I think that's really important. Next slide, Karen. So explain what your current company status is. I think it's important for investors to know how much money you've raised and where it's come from. For example, if you've received any grants or any awards that are noticeable, you want to bring those up. You can also explain, what stage of development you're in, and here you'll also want to talk about your management team. And here again, we want to avoid being too ambiguous. So saying that the CEO is an experienced entrepreneur is not a good description of the CEO. If the CEO happens to have entrepreneurial experience and has had successful exits, you definitely want to describe those in more detail, because that's a huge added benefit of the company, just being able to talk about the CEO's positive experience. Now, the CEO doesn't always have prior experience as an entrepreneur. There are many first-time entrepreneurs who come to the RESI conference and who we meet at conferences around the world. And there are other ways to highlight the management team other than the CEO's particular entrepreneurial experience. So you can definitely talk about other experiences in industry that the CEO might have, and other key management team members. And you can also highlight advisory board members or members of the board of directors who add particular value because of their own experience. And that's often a way to supplement the management team with experienced people when the actual management team of the company are first timers or have less experience. So whatever the case be, you want to describe that very clearly when you're talking about the current company status. Next slide. So you will have a near-term and a long-term strategy. I think it's important to use a timeline of some sort. There are many different formats of timelines that you can put in a presentation, but I think investors really appreciate understanding what is your current situation, what milestones are you looking to achieve over the next 2 to 3 years, and how much funding will you need to reach those milestones. So I think that's a really important part of your presentation. Surprisingly, a lot of companies don't include a timeline like that. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because investors really like to have an understanding of what the evolution of this company is going to be. And seeing over the next 3 years, if I invest money in this company today, how long will that last them? How much runway will that get? And what milestones will be reached? So if they can see that clearly, you are automatically answering some questions that they will definitely have in the future. You can answer those beforehand by putting that in your presentation. Talk about key relationships like key opinion leaders, hospitals, industry partners, manufacturing partners, etc. If you don't have any patents, what is your strategy? And how many applications are you planning to file or have you filed? There's always something to be said about intellectual property. The worst thing you can do is not bring it up, because if you don't bring up intellectual property, first of all, it's a key element of your presentation that's missing, but also it might give the impression that you don't have any intellectual property or even a strategy to get it. So you definitely want to bring it up, and whatever the case be, just explain clearly what the situation is. Providing enough information, but don't go overboard. Now, in a 4-minute presentation, you really don't have a lot of time to go overboard on information. This is something that an investor told us at a RESI conference not too long ago. Your pitch, your presentation is really like the trailer of a movie. What you really want is to get everyone interested enough in your company that they will want to have a meeting to learn more. So it's not about giving all of the detail of how your technology works, but giving an overview that everyone can understand of what your technology is, an overview of the data that you have, pointing out the kind of a summary of what data you have achieved, but you don't have time to go into detail. You can't talk about every trial that you've carried out, every experiment, every publication that you may have published or that you have under your belt. So you don't have time to go overboard. But you really need to not miss any of those key points that we mentioned earlier, like IP and management team and your current status and things like that. So be careful about how much information you're including for each particular topic, because you don't have a lot of time and you want to get at least an overview of everything in this presentation of 4 minutes. Next slide. So in a 4-minute presentation, and this is just going back over what we said earlier, you don't want to leave out any of these key elements to your presentation because they're all important. And the investors will want to understand where you are and what you're planning under all of these things that we mentioned earlier. Next slide. Okay, I will pass the mic back to Karen to talk about investor questions.
Yes. So you've given your pitch. Now you're facing the panel for the Q&A. What kinds of questions can you expect them to ask? And so it will depend on what you've chosen to highlight in your pitch, because clearly you can't include all of the information in your pitch itself. For our conferences, we do send the panel your marketing collateral and the link to your agenda, to your live agenda page before the session, and ask them to look through your materials. So they should at least be familiar with what you're doing before the session. But they might still have questions that you haven't quite covered to their satisfaction, or just to ask more in-depth questions that, you've piqued their interest and they want to know more. These could include things about the technology. So what more information about the product or how it addresses the market need? What validating data or milestones have you achieved? Are there any other applications for this technology? Do you have a pipeline that you're planning on bringing it to other indications, or what are you planning to do in the future with this technology? Because a company isn't just one product. So where are you planning on doing this eventually? Where are you planning on applying this elsewhere eventually? In terms of the market and the competition. So one key thing is that you're going to want to give information about a specific market size. You can't just say things like cancer or diabetes. You have to be more specific than that. What specific indication of cancer or what specific patient segment is your technology related to, if it's digital health, or what specific types of procedures are you relevant to, if it's a medical device. The narrower you are and the more specific you can be, the better off you'll be. And you can say, yes, well, we're addressing this niche market first. We think eventually we'll have a larger addressable market. The way I've seen people do it is by insets of circles showing total, huge market, and then going in further by narrowing it down and saying, well, this is this particular injury or indication, and then narrowing it further, like within that indication or injury, this is the subset that we're focusing on to begin with. And showing where you can expand, but the smaller market segment where you're starting, because you can't start with a 5 billion market. That does not make sense, and that's a very big red flag for investors. What are the barriers to entry? What are you going to need to prove based on the current standard of care? Is there going to be some sort of regulatory or reimbursement hurdle that you're going to need to face? In addition, more about the competitive landscape, what, as I mentioned, the current standard of care, but what other technologies are there, both, on the market, or, doing your market research, what other companies have products in development that could compete with yours? Why is yours better? What differentiates your product from what's currently on the market? And what other companies are bringing to the market? Other questions could be more specifics about regulatory reimbursement, and it's, do you need them? Do you have a strategy for achieving them? Have you employed a consultant for regulatory or reimbursement? Or if you don't need a consultant, have you started conversations with the FDA, or have you gotten your reimbursement number, whatever it may be? Have you considered it? In addition, they might ask you questions about your fundraising plan and your path to an exit. What will be your use of funds? What milestones will you achieve? What is the time frame for achieving those milestones? At what point will you need to fundraise again? Or what is your path to an exit? Is it going to be an acquisition? Are you going to be doing in-house sales? Are you going to IPO? And what approximate time frame is this going to be? This is, questions that investors will have. And of course, they will always ask questions about the management team. What experience or expertise they have in the field. Are there any key opinion leaders involved? This is all very important to them because, many investors will even say that they invest in the team first and the technology second. Because you can do a lot of pivoting with a good idea, but a great team will make it happen, which is why a lot of investors are focused so much on the team. Now, one thing to note is that investors won't necessarily expect you to have answers to all of these questions, especially the earlier stage you are. For a Series B company, they will definitely expect you to have answers to a lot more of these questions than a seed stage company. But even for a seed stage company, they want to know that you have at least have taken the time to think about these questions, to plot out a strategy. That strategy might change, but they want to know that you've considered it, and that you have a reasonable approach, even knowing that might change. So even if you don't have the answers, definitely think about the questions and how you would answer them, saying, this is what we've done so far, this is what we're planning to do at this stage. Do we have any questions?
So that was a really good point, Karen, about the questions that investors will ask. And I think that really makes a difference in our at our conference in the IPC, the format that we use that allows for 10 minutes of Q&A for each company makes the topic of being able to answer the questions more important, because you're being asked questions in front of an audience, and it's important to be prepared for what they might ask you.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was great.
And keep in mind also that the more you pitch, the more you'll get these questions. And if you start seeing the same questions over and over again, then that's an indication that that area is a bit lacking in your marketing collateral and your pitch. And you can hone your pitch and adjust for answering the questions that you see the most frequently. And that'll just improve your pitch. And you can definitely view these pitches as not only a way to increase your exposure, but also as practice sessions, because your marketing collateral and your pitch should be constantly evolving and improving. And definitely take advantage of all of these situations to really work on it and learn for the next time.
Yep. And just summarizing the most common mistakes that we see at the RESI IPC are companies that tend to focus way too much on the science in their presentation and don't give that key information about investor readiness that is so important for this audience. This isn't a scientific conference. This is an investor partnering conference. So keep that in mind when you're preparing your presentation, because it's really important.